Millionaire sees pregnant ex-wife. Working as a waitress at his wedding, his reaction shocks everyone. The crystalline chandeliers of the Sterling Estate ballroom bathed the grand space in a warm, golden light. Each crystal facet refracted the glow, casting scattered prisms across the ivory walls adorned with delicate hand-painted floral murals. Every inch of the room was a testament to perfection, from the marble floors polished to a mirror-like sheen to the towering arrangements of white roses and lilies that crowned each circular table. Waitstaff glided silently between guests, trays of champagne flutes balanced effortlessly in their hands. Laughter and the tinkling of glassware filled the air, blending seamlessly with the live string quartet tucked discreetly into one corner of the room. This was, by all accounts, a wedding that would be remembered. At the heart of it all stood Alex Sterling, his custom-tailored suit fitting like a second skin. His sandy hair was meticulously combed, and his piercing blue eyes carried the weight of the moment, or at least they were supposed to. He looked the part of a man who had it all: wealth, prestige, and now Victoria Hayes, the stunning socialite whose very name conjured images of old money glamour and impeccable taste. She was radiant, of course, in her bespoke gown of intricate lace and pearls, her laughter like music as she moved through the crowd, accepting compliments with practiced grace. Alex's lips curled into a faint smile as he sipped his champagne, nodding at guests as they approached to offer their congratulations. Yet, beneath the surface of his polished exterior, there was a hollowness he couldn't shake. It wasn't that he didn't care for Victoria. She was everything anyone could want. Beautiful, clever, ambitious, perfect, in the way people like them were expected to be. But as Alex scanned the room, he felt an inexplicable ache tug at his chest, a sense that something vital had been left behind in his climb to this pinnacle. It was during this moment of quiet reflection that he saw her. She was standing near the edge of the room, partially obscured by one of the floral arrangements. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, tendrils framing a face he hadn't seen in years, but would never forget. Sarah Bennett. His breath caught in his throat. She was wearing a simple black dress, the kind issued by catering companies, designed to blend into the background. Her hands moved deftly, collecting empty glasses and crumpled napkins from a table where a group of tipsy guests had vacated their seats. Her movements were efficient, practiced, but there was a weariness to her posture, a heaviness that made Alex's chest tighten. Then he saw it, the subtle curve of her belly beneath the unflattering uniform. Pregnant. For a moment, the opulence around him seemed to blur and dim. The polished grandeur of the ballroom, the expensive perfume mingling with the scent of champagne and roses, the laughter and chatter of the elite, all of it faded as his mind raced to process what he was seeing. Sarah Bennett, his ex-wife, the woman he had once loved so fiercely it had terrified him, was here, and she was pregnant. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. Memories he thought he had buried came rushing back, sharp and vivid. Late nights spent talking about dreams and fears. The way her laughter had filled their tiny apartment when they had nothing but each other and a pile of unpaid bills. The fights, the apologies. The silence that had grown between them, vast and unbridgeable, until there was nothing left to say but goodbye. And now she was here, in his world, but not as a guest, not as someone who belonged. She was cleaning tables, blending into the background like a shadow. She looked up then, as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met, and Alex's heart slammed against his ribs. For a second, neither of them moved. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of professionalism that couldn't quite conceal the flicker of recognition in her dark eyes. Then she broke the gaze, turning away to resume her work, her movements quicker now, more purposeful. But Alex couldn't look away. A storm of emotions swirled within him: shock, guilt, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite name. His hand tightened around the stem of his champagne glass, the cold press of the crystal grounding him just enough to keep him standing. Questions crowded his mind, each more urgent than the last. Was she married? Who was the father? Why was she here working at his wedding? And why, after all this time, did seeing her still feel like this? "Darling, are you all right?" Victoria's voice broke through the haze. She appeared at his side, her hand slipping into the crook of his arm, her delicate fingers giving him a gentle squeeze. She tilted her head, her perfectly painted lips curving into a concerned smile. "You look pale," she said. "Are you feeling okay?" Alex forced a smile, the kind he had perfected over years of boardroom meetings and charity galas. "I'm fine," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil roiling beneath the surface. "Just a bit overwhelmed, that's all." Victoria's smile widened, radiant and reassuring. "Well, it's a big day," she said, leaning in to press a kiss to his cheek. "Come find me if you need a moment." She drifted away, her gown trailing behind her like a whisper, leaving Alex standing there frozen. His eyes sought out Sarah again, but she was gone, vanished into the sea of guests and staff. The room felt suffocating now, the weight of its perfection pressing down on him. For the first time that evening, Alex Sterling, the man who seemingly had it all, felt utterly lost. The sound of shattering glass drew a few startled gasps from the nearby tables, but Sarah Bennett barely flinched. She bent quickly, her hands steady as she gathered the broken shards from the marble floor. Her dark hair fell in loose strands around her face, the bun she'd tied hastily hours ago now unraveling under the strain of the evening. Her fingers worked deftly, ignoring the slight sting as a sharp edge grazed her skin. She was used to this, the long hours, the menial tasks, the way people barely saw her as they laughed and clinked their glasses. It hadn't always been this way. Years ago, Sarah had been the kind of woman who turned heads in a room, not because of her looks, though her beauty was undeniable, but because of the energy she exuded. She had been ambitious, vibrant, and full of ideas that lit up her conversations. She had wanted to make a difference, to build something meaningful. That drive had led her to Alex Sterling. She had met him in college, back when life was less complicated. Alex had been magnetic, his confidence tempered by an unexpected vulnerability that had drawn Sarah in like a moth to a flame. They had been inseparable, studying late into the night, dreaming of a future that seemed boundless. Their tiny apartment had been their haven, filled with second-hand furniture and walls plastered with sticky notes mapping out their shared goals. They had loved fiercely, and for a while it had been enough. But dreams had a way of diverging. Alex's ambitions had grown beyond anything Sarah could keep pace with. He wanted more money, more power, more recognition. Sarah, in contrast, had craved stability, a simple life filled with love and purpose. The fracture had been inevitable, though it hadn't made it any less painful. She still remembered the way Alex's voice had cracked when he'd said goodbye, his eyes filled with regret, even as he walked away. And now, here she was, picking up the pieces literally and figuratively, while Alex stood on the other side of the room, surrounded by wealth and privilege, his perfect life on full display. Sarah straightened, cradling the broken glass in her hands as she turned toward the kitchen. Her steps were measured, careful, but her mind raced with memories. She hadn't wanted to take this job, not at his wedding of all places, but the bills didn't care about her pride. The baby growing inside her didn't either. She'd almost made it to the back when she heard the voice. "Excuse me, aren't you supposed to be working?" The words were sharp, cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a whip. Sarah turned slowly, her stomach sinking as she met the gaze of a guest, a middle-aged woman in an emerald gown that clung too tightly to her figure. The woman's lips curled in disdain as she waved a manicured hand toward the table. "There's a spill here," the woman continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "Do you think you could do your job instead of lingering?" Heat rushed to Sarah's cheeks, but she forced herself to stay calm. She set the broken glass aside and grabbed a cloth from her apron, stepping toward the table. "I'm sorry for the delay," she said quietly. kneeling to clean the spilled champagne. The woman's scoff was audible. "Honestly, I don't know why they hire people like you. It's a wonder you even passed the background check." Sarah froze, the cloth trembling in her hand. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The humiliation was suffocating, made worse by the fact that she couldn't defend herself without risking her job. She forced her gaze downward, her vision blurring as tears threatened to spill. "That's enough." The voice was low and firm, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Sarah looked up in shock to see Alex standing just a few feet away, his expression cold and unyielding as he addressed the woman in emerald. "I believe she's doing her job just fine," Alex continued, his tone measured but unmistakably sharp. "If you have an issue, take it up with the management. Otherwise, I suggest you keep your comments to yourself." The woman blinked, momentarily stunned into silence. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but seemed to think better of it. With a huff, she turned on her heel and stalked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Sarah's heart was pounding as Alex turned to her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His gaze softened, the icy mask he'd worn slipping to reveal something far more vulnerable. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Sarah nodded, unable to find her words. Her hands tightened around the cloth as she rose to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. She could feel the weight of the room's attention pressing down on her, every pair of eyes fixed on the scene that had just unfolded. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Alex's jaw tightened, and for a moment it seemed as though he wanted to say something more. But then a figure appeared at his side, Victoria, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes sharp as they darted between Alex and Sarah. "Darling," Victoria said, her tone light but laced with an undercurrent of suspicion. "What's going on?" Alex hesitated, the tension in his shoulders betraying his discomfort. "Nothing," he said finally, slipping back into the polished demeanor that came so easily to him. "Just handling a small issue." Victoria's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but she nodded, looping her arm through his. "Come on," she said, tugging him gently. "Our guests are waiting." As they walked away, Sarah exhaled shakily, her chest aching with a mix of gratitude and bitterness. The Alex she had known would have defended her too. But this Alex, the one married to a woman like Victoria, the one who belonged to a world that Sarah could never enter, felt like a stranger. And yet, as she watched him disappear into the crowd, she couldn't help but feel the faintest flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. The evening's festivities carried on, the sounds of clinking glasses and lively chatter filling the Sterling estate. Yet for Alex, the vibrant energy of the wedding felt like a distant hum as he slipped out of the ballroom. His steps were brisk, purposeful, his mind racing as he scanned the hallways for Sarah. He found her in the back corridor near the service entrance, her apron folded neatly on a bench beside her. She was leaning against the wall, her head tilted back, eyes closed as though trying to steady herself. The faint flicker of a fluorescent light overhead cast uneven shadows on her face. For a moment, Alex hesitated. She looked tired, vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache with something he couldn't quite name, but then his thoughts snapped back to the curve of her belly, and a storm of questions surged within him. "Sarah," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Her eyes flew open, and for a brief second there was a flash of something: fear, frustration, relief. It was gone before he could decipher it, replaced by a guarded expression as she straightened. "What do you want, Alex?" she asked, her tone flat but steady. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "We need to talk about the baby." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, and she crossed her arms over her chest. "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice tight. "It's none of your business. Not my business." Alex's frustration flared, his brows knitting together. "How can you say that? Sarah, if the baby is mine—" "Don't," She cut him off, her voice rising just enough to echo faintly down the empty corridor. "Don't do this, Alex. Not here, not now." He took a deep breath, trying to temper his emotions. "Then when?" he asked, his tone softening but no less urgent. "You can't just drop back into my life like this, pregnant, and expect me to ignore it. I deserve to know the truth." Her laugh was bitter, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and pain. "The truth? You want the truth, Alex? Fine. The truth is, you abandoned me long before we officially broke up. You were so consumed with your career, your ambitions, that I stopped mattering. We stopped mattering. I was just there, a convenience you outgrew." The words hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment Alex was stunned into silence. He had expected resistance, maybe even anger, but the rawness of her words cut deeper than he'd anticipated. "That's not fair," he said finally, his voice low. "You knew what I was working for, what we were building toward. I thought you understood." "Understood?" Sarah's voice broke slightly, and she shook her head, her hands gripping her sides as though trying to hold herself together. "I understood that I was losing you. Every late night at the office, every missed dinner, every time you made me feel like I wasn't enough, I understood perfectly. And when I realized I couldn't compete with your dreams, I let you go. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to." Alex's chest tightened, guilt twisting like a knife. "Sarah," he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "You don't get to play the victim here," she said, her voice firm. "You moved on. You have your perfect life, your perfect wife, and I—" She paused, exhaling shakily. "I'm just trying to survive. That's why I didn't tell you about the baby. Because I couldn't handle the disappointment if you walked away again." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Alex opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. "Alex?" The voice was light, melodic, but tinged with an edge of suspicion. Victoria appeared at the end of the corridor, her figure framed by the soft glow of the ballroom behind her. Her perfectly sculpted brows furrowed as she took in the scene before her. "What's going on?" she asked, her gaze shifting between Alex and Sarah. Sarah immediately looked away, her hands falling to her sides as she took a small step back. Alex's jaw tightened, and he turned to face Victoria, his expression carefully neutral. "Just a private conversation," he said, his tone measured. I knew Sarah from college. We were catching up." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, how lovely," she said, her voice sugary sweet, but her gaze lingered on Sarah's face, sharp and assessing. "I don't believe we've been introduced." Sarah's hands curled into fists at her sides, and she forced herself to meet Victoria's gaze. "I'm just one of the staff," she said evenly, her voice devoid of emotion. Victoria's smile widened slightly, and she tilted her head. "Well, thank you for all your hard work tonight," she said, her tone polite but dismissive. Alex's stomach churned as he watched the interaction, the tension palpable. He could see the wheels turning in Victoria's mind, her natural intuition piecing together fragments of a story she didn't yet fully understand. "Darling," she said, turning her attention back to Alex, her voice softer now, "are you coming back to the party? Our guests are wondering where you are." Alex hesitated, his gaze flickering to Sarah, who had already begun to gather her things, retreating into herself. He wanted to say something, to fix the brokenness that seemed to radiate from her, but Victoria's hand on his arm anchored him to the present. "Of course," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Let's go." As they walked away, Victoria cast one last glance over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. Alex felt the weight of her suspicions settling over him, a reminder that the past he thought he'd left behind was far from over. The Sterling estate had fallen into a heavy post-celebration quiet. The distant echoes of the staff cleaning up were barely audible through the thick walls of the private suite where Alex sat, his tie loosened, his fingers steepled against his forehead. The weight of the evening pressed down on him, an inescapable tension that throbbed at the base of his skull. Victoria had left the room moments ago, but her parting words hung in the air like smoke. "You need to make a decision, Alex," she had said, her voice tight but controlled, betraying none of the fury simmering beneath. "This, whatever this is with her, it's over. You're my husband. You need to act like it." Her ultimatum was as clear as it was ruthless. Victoria had always been decisive, a woman who knew what she wanted and how to get it. It was one of the things that had initially drawn Alex to her, her unyielding confidence, a sharp contrast to the uncertainty that had plagued him for so long. But tonight, that same quality felt suffocating, her sharp gaze cutting through him like a scalpel as she demanded answers he wasn't ready to give. He had tried to explain, tried to tell her that his conversation with Sarah was nothing, that it had stirred up old feelings, but meant little in the grand scheme of things. But Victoria had seen through him, her eyes narrowing as he fumbled for words. She'd left without waiting for a response, her heels clicking sharply against the marble as she disappeared down the corridor. Now, alone in the dimly lit suite, Alex wrestled with the knot of emotions twisting inside him. Guilt, frustration, confusion. Sarah's words from earlier played over and over in his mind, her voice trembling as she accused him of abandoning her, of leaving her to pick up the pieces of their shattered life together. And then there was the baby. His chest tightened at the thought. Could it really be his? If so, what did that mean for the life he had built with Victoria? A sharp knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. Frowning, Alex rose and crossed the room, opening the door to find a young staff member holding an envelope. The boy's uniform was slightly rumpled, his eyes wide with a mixture of nerves and exhaustion. "This was left for you, sir," the boy said, holding out the envelope. Alex hesitated before taking it, his heart quickening as he recognized the handwriting scrawled across the front. Sarah's "Thank you," he said, his voice stiff. The boy nodded and hurried away, leaving Alex standing in the doorway with the envelope clutched in his hand. He closed the door and returned to his seat, staring at the envelope as though it were a living thing, something that might lash out if he got too close. Finally, with a deep breath, he slid a finger beneath the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The scent of faintly perfumed paper met his nose, a bittersweet reminder of nights spent in their cramped apartment. Sarah curled up beside him with a notebook in hand, scribbling her thoughts and dreams. The letter began simply, the ink slightly smudged in places as though written in haste or through tears. "Alex, I don't even know where to begin. Seeing you tonight brought back so much, things I thought I had buried long ago. But you deserve to know the truth, even if it's too late, even if it doesn't change anything. When we broke up, I thought I could handle it. I thought I could start over, build a life without you. But it wasn't as easy as I told myself it would be. My family turned their backs on me, called me foolish for loving someone who didn't fit into our world. I lost my job a month later, and with no support system, no safety net, I fell apart. There were nights I didn't know where my next meal would come from. I pawned my grandmother's necklace to pay rent, begged for extra shifts at jobs that barely kept the lights on. I wanted to hate you, Alex. I wanted to blame you for all of it, but I couldn't. I still can't. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. Terrified of what it meant for me, for the baby. But more than that, I was terrified of telling you, not because I didn't think you'd care, because I knew you would, but because I couldn't bear to see the disappointment in your eyes if I wasn't enough, if the baby wasn't enough to make you stay. So I made the choice for both of us. I don't regret keeping her a secret. It was the only way I could protect myself. But seeing you tonight, knowing you're here, I can't help but wonder if I was wrong. If maybe, just maybe, you deserved the chance to know. Her name is Lily. She's 3 months along and she's perfect. She has your eyes, Alex. I see them every time I look at her. I don't expect anything from you. I don't even know if you want to be part of her life, but you deserve the truth, and this is it. Sarah. The letter trembled in Alex's hands as he finished reading. His mind reeled, trying to absorb the weight of her words, the enormity of what she had revealed. Lily, his daughter. The name felt foreign and familiar all at once, a strange mixture of joy and sorrow swelling in his chest. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the letter as though it held the answers to questions he hadn't yet formed. His thoughts were a whirlwind, torn between the life he had built with Victoria and the life he had left behind with Sarah. One filled with polished perfection, the other raw and unfinished but undeniably real. And somewhere in the depths of his heart, Alex knew he was standing on the precipice of a decision that would change everything. The soft hum of the morning city filtered through the tall windows of Alex's penthouse office. The skyline stretched before him, a testament to his accomplishments. Towering buildings bearing his name, bustling streets filled with the energy of a world he had helped shape. Yet, as he stared out at the view that had once filled him with pride, all he felt was an emptiness that refused to be ignored. He sat in his leather chair, the letter from Sarah still folded neatly in his pocket. It had been days since he'd received it, yet her words echoed constantly in his mind, pulling him back to moments he had tried to forget. Memories of Sarah, her laughter, her unwavering belief in him, the way she had been his anchor through the storms of his ambition. But he had let her go. Or more truthfully, he had pushed her away, blind to the cost of chasing a future that now felt hollow. Alex closed his eyes, leaning back as he let the memories come. In the early days, their apartment had been a chaotic mess of textbooks, take-out containers, and hastily scribbled plans on cheap notebooks. Sarah had always been there, a constant presence who balanced his restless drive with her quiet strength. He remembered the nights when they stayed up until dawn, her head resting on his shoulder as they talked about their dreams, his for building an empire, hers for making a difference, even if it was on a smaller scale. She had worked 2 jobs to support them when he decided to take a risk on an unpaid internship at a prestigious firm. She had believed in him even when he doubted himself, her encouragement a lifeline during those uncertain years. Yet, as his success grew, so did the distance between them. He had told himself it was temporary, that once he reached a certain point, he'd have time to focus on her, on them. But that point had never come, and by the time he realized it, Sarah was gone. A knock at the door pulled Alex from his thoughts. His assistant stepped in, holding a tablet and a stack of documents. "Mr. Sterling, your tenoi is ready to begin," she said. Alex shook his head, rising from his chair. "Cancel it," he said simply. "Cancel everything for the rest of the week." The assistant blinked, startled. "Sir? I'm delegating. Have Thompson and Ramirez handle anything urgent? I need—" He hesitated, glancing back at the skyline. "I need some time." The decision to step back from his empire was met with shock and confusion, but Alex didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity. He spent his days quietly unraveling the tangled mess of his priorities, rediscovering what truly mattered. Without fanfare, he set up a trust fund for Sarah and Lily, ensuring they would never have to struggle again. He wanted to do more, but he wasn't ready to face Sarah directly, not yet. Instead, he poured himself into the simple human moments he had neglected for so long. He took long walks in the park, watched the sunrise without rushing to the office, and listened to music without the hum of emails in the background. Slowly he began to feel a shift, a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to profit margins or board meetings. The turning point came at a high-profile charity gala Victoria had insisted they attend. The event was everything she loved, opulent, exclusive, and crawling with photographers. Alex had agreed to go, knowing it was a necessary performance to maintain appearances. But as the night wore on, he found himself withdrawing, the shallow conversations and superficial smiles grating against his newfound perspective. Victoria, however, was in her element. Draped in a designer gown, she flitted from group to group, her laughter ringing out like a bell. But her demeanor shifted when she caught Alex standing alone near the edge of the ballroom, his expression distant. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, pulling him aside. Her voice was low, but her tone was sharp enough to draw the attention of those nearby. Alex frowned, caught off guard by her sudden anger. "What are you talking about?" "You've been sulking all night," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how this looks? People are watching, Alex. They're always watching. You can't afford to be distracted." "Distracted?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Maybe I'm tired of pretending. Did you ever think of that?" Victoria's eyes narrowed, her carefully constructed mask slipping. "Pretending?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I've stood by you, Alex, through everything, and now you're... what? Throwing it all away? For what? For her?" The room fell silent as her words rang out, the murmurs of nearby guests halting as they turned to watch the scene unfolding. Alex felt the weight of their stares, but he didn't care. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of what they thought. "This isn't about her," he said, his voice steady. "It's about me, about what I've become." He took a step back, his gaze unwavering as he met Victoria's furious eyes. "I'm done pretending, Victoria, done living a life that isn't mine." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to contain her fury. But before she could respond, Alex turned and walked away, leaving the ballroom and the life he had built behind him. The annulment was finalized quietly, the details buried beneath layers of legalese and non-disclosure agreements. Victoria's obsession with appearances ensured she wouldn't contest it publicly, though her parting words were sharp enough to leave scars. Alex didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt free. And as he stood outside the modest apartment building where Sarah lived, clutching a bouquet of lilies in one hand and a trembling hope in the other, he realized he was ready to begin again. The late autumn sun cast a soft golden glow over the small suburban street where Sarah's modest home sat. The house, though unassuming, exuded warmth and care. The flower boxes on the windows were filled with vibrant mums, their bright colors a testament to Sarah's growing sense of stability. She had worked hard to carve out this life, a life that, while far from glamorous, was hers and hers alone. Inside, Sarah stood in the tiny kitchen, her hands moving deftly as she prepared dinner. The rhythmic chop of the knife against the cutting board was soothing, grounding her as she reflected on how far she had come. After Alex, there had been dark days when she wasn't sure she would find her footing again. But she had. Slowly, she had rebuilt herself, brick by brick, finding solace in the small victories, a job that paid the bills, friends who cared, and the steady, reassuring kick of her baby as she planned for their future. Sarah's career at a local non-profit had started as a necessity, but soon became a passion. Helping others who had faced struggles similar to hers gave her purpose, and the connections she built through her work became the foundation of a support network she hadn't realized she needed. She had learned to trust herself again, her resilience shining through even on the hardest days. For the first time in years, she felt strong. Alex had seen this strength, and it humbled him. Over the past few weeks, he had quietly observed the life Sarah had built, marveling at her resilience. She didn't need him to swoop in and fix things. She had already done that on her own, but that didn't mean he didn't want to be part of her life. For the first time, Alex approached their relationship, whatever it might become, not with the arrogance of someone trying to solve a problem, but with the humility of someone trying to support. He began to show up in small, meaningful ways, dropping off groceries under the guise of an extra delivery from a local program, leaving a handwritten note with words of encouragement in her mailbox, or donating anonymously to the non-profit where she worked. He wasn't sure if she knew it was him, but he didn't mind. This wasn't about recognition. It was about showing her that he cared without overstepping. One crisp afternoon, Alex finally worked up the courage to knock on her door. She answered cautiously, her expression guarded but curious. He held out a bouquet of lilies, his voice soft as he said, "I thought these might brighten your day." Sarah hesitated, but something in his eyes made her step aside and let him in. Their conversation was slow and careful, each word measured, as though they were relearning how to speak to one another. But beneath the caution was a warmth that neither of them could ignore. They spoke about the changes in their lives, their hopes for the future, and the unspoken weight of their past. By the end of the visit, Sarah found herself smiling a genuine, unguarded smile. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, she was open to finding out. The peace they were beginning to rebuild was tested far sooner than either expected. Late one night, Sarah's contractions started earlier than they should have, the sharp pain waking her from sleep. Panic set in as the contractions grew closer together, and she realized something was wrong. She called a friend from her support group, who rushed over to take her to the hospital. The drive was a blur of streetlights and labored breaths, her friend's calm voice trying to soothe her. When they arrived at the emergency room, Sarah was wheeled away, fear gripping her as the fluorescent lights above flickered past. Alex received the call shortly after. He had been awake, staring out at the city from his penthouse, Sarah's name on the tip of his tongue as he rehearsed the conversation he planned to have with her the next day. When his phone buzzed and he saw the hospital's number, his heart stopped. The drive to the hospital was agonizing. Every red light felt like an eternity, and by the time he reached the waiting room, his chest was tight with fear. Sarah's friend met him there, her face pale as she explained the situation. The baby was in distress. Sarah was losing blood. The doctors were doing everything they could, but there were no guarantees. Alex sank into one of the hard plastic chairs, his head in his hands. The sterile smell of the hospital filled his nose, the low hum of the fluorescent lights above grating against his nerves. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second a fresh wave of torment as he imagined the worst. And then, in that unbearable silence, came clarity. For so long he had been consumed by guilt, by the need to make amends, to prove that he could be better. But sitting here, faced with the very real possibility of losing Sarah and the child he had never met, Alex realized it wasn't about redemption. It was about love. He loved Sarah, he always had, and now, more than ever, he wanted to be there for her, to fight for the family they might still have a chance to build. When the doctor finally emerged, Alex shot to his feet. The man's expression was tired but kind as he said, "The baby's in the NICU, but she's stable, Sarah. She's strong. She'll pull through, but she'll need time to recover." Relief washed over Alex, his legs nearly giving out as he sank back into the chair. Tears pricked his eyes, but he didn't bother to wipe them away. "Can I see her?" he asked hoarsely. The doctor nodded. "Just for a moment. She needs rest." Alex followed the nurse down the quiet hallway, his heart pounding as he stepped into the room. Sarah lay pale and fragile against the stark whiteness of the hospital bed, her eyes fluttering open as he approached. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words needed. Then Alex reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm not going anywhere." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she gave the faintest nod, her fingers curling weakly around his. And in that moment, despite the fear and uncertainty that lay ahead, they both felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but undeniable promise of what could be. Over the next several weeks, Alex dedicated himself fully to supporting Sarah and their newborn daughter, Hope. He learned to navigate the NICU's sterile environment, spending hours at Hope's side, watching as her tiny chest rose and fell with each breath. The nurses taught him how to feed her, hold her, and soothe her when she fussed. He marveled at her resilience, her strength a mirror of Sarah's. Sarah, though physically weak, began to heal in small, steady steps. She and Alex grew closer, their late-night conversations in the hospital room filled with honesty and vulnerability. They spoke of their past mistakes, their fears, and their shared dreams for Hope's future. One evening, as they sat together watching Hope sleep in her incubator, Alex turned to Sarah. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about what really matters, about what kind of life I want to build for Hope, for us." Sarah looked at him, her expression wary but curious. "And what do you see?" "A life with meaning," he replied. "A life where I'm present, where I'm not chasing the next big thing but focusing on what's right in front of me. You and Hope. You're my family, Sarah. And I want to build a future with you, one that's grounded in love and respect." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in years, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. "That's a big promise, Alex," she said quietly. "I know," he said, his voice steady, "but it's one I intend to keep." Months later, on a bright spring day, Alex, Sarah and Hope found themselves at the park near Sarah's home. Hope, now thriving and healthy, giggled as she lay on a blanket in the grass, her tiny hands reaching for the sky. Alex and Sarah sat side by side on a bench, their shoulders brushing as they watched her. "She's beautiful," Alex said, his voice filled with awe. Sarah smiled, her gaze never leaving their daughter. "She's our miracle," she said softly. Alex reached over, taking Sarah's hand in his. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me this chance." Sarah looked at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Just don't waste it," she replied, her voice firm but kind. As the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, the three of them sat together, surrounded by love and possibility. And in that quiet moment, they knew they had found not just redemption, but a new foundation for the life they would build together. The first rays of dawn filtered through the hospital room's curtains, casting a soft golden light over the scene within. Sarah lay propped against the bed's pillows, her skin pale but her expression serene as she cradled her newborn daughter in her arms. The baby was impossibly small, swaddled in a pastel pink blanket, her tiny hand curling instinctively around Sarah's finger. "Hope," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and wonder. The name felt right, a reflection of everything she had endured, everything she had fought for. This tiny, fragile being was her anchor, her reminder that even in the darkest moments there was a path forward. Alex stood a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets as though to steady himself. His eyes were locked on the baby, his heart swelling with emotions too vast to name. He had always thought of himself as composed, in control, but the sight of his daughter broke something open inside him. "Can I?" he asked hesitantly, gesturing toward the baby. Sarah glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she gave a small nod. Alex approached cautiously, his movements almost reverent, as he reached out to take the baby into his arms. She was so light, so delicate, that he held his breath for fear of disturbing her. Hope's face scrunched slightly as she shifted, but then she settled, her tiny breath steady against his chest. Alex felt a lump rise in his throat, and for the first time in years tears slid freely down his face. "She's perfect," he said softly, his voice trembling. Sarah watched him closely, her own emotions a tangle of lingering doubts and a cautious yearning for the man she had once loved. Over the next few days, Alex remained by Sarah's side. He helped with the baby, fetched meals, and sat silently in the corner during moments when she needed rest. He didn't push or demand, he simply stayed, his quiet presence speaking volumes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the room in shades of amber, Alex finally broke the silence. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability, "I know I can't undo the past. I can't erase the mistakes I made or the pain I caused you, but I want to try. Not to fix what was broken, but to build something new, something better." Sarah looked at him, her gaze searching. "Why now, Alex?" she asked. "Why not years ago when I needed you most?" He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Because I was blind," he admitted. "I was so consumed with chasing success, with proving something to myself, that I lost sight of what really mattered. It took losing you to realize how much you meant to me. and it took meeting Hope to realize that I don't want to spend another day without you both in my life." Sarah's expression softened, but her guard didn't fully drop. "I don't need saving, Alex," she said firmly. "I've worked hard to get to where I am. If we're going to try this, it has to be as equals. I won't settle for anything less." Alex nodded, his respect for her deepening. "You have my word," he said. "No fixing, no overstepping. Just us figuring this out together." After a long pause, Sarah gave a small, hesitant smile. "Then let's see where it goes." True to his word, Alex began making changes not just in his personal life, but in the way he approached the world. He sold off a significant portion of his company, redirecting the proceeds to community initiatives that aligned with the values he had once ignored. Affordable housing projects, small business grants, and educational programs for underserved communities became his focus, a tangible way to give back and create lasting impact. It wasn't just about proving himself to Sarah, it was about becoming the man he wanted to be, the man Hope could be proud to call her father. Months passed and their lives began to intertwine in quiet, meaningful ways. Alex accompanied Sarah to her non-profit events, not as a benefactor, but as a participant, listening to stories and learning from the people she served. Sarah, in turn, began to see the depth of his commitment, his actions slowly eroding the walls she had built around her heart. On a crisp spring afternoon, the three of them found themselves at a small park near Sarah's home. Hope, now a few months old, was bundled in a soft yellow blanket, her wide eyes taking in the world with quiet curiosity. Sarah and Alex sat on a worn wooden bench, their shoulders brushing as they watched the sunlight filter through the trees. "She loves the outdoors," Sarah said, her voice warm as she adjusted the blanket around Hope. Alex smiled, his gaze fixed on his daughter. "She gets that from you," he said. Sarah glanced at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she smiled. "Maybe she does," she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the sounds of birdsong and children's laughter filling the air. Alex reached over, his hand finding Sarah's. She didn't pull away. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me this chance." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "Just don't waste it," she replied, her eyes meeting his. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park, Alex leaned back and watched his daughter with a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time, his life felt whole, not because of the empire he had built or the accolades he had achieved, but because of the family sitting beside him. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by love and possibility, Alex knew they had found something stronger than redemption. They had found a new foundation, adding tensions and intrigue. One evening, Alex and Sarah attended a community fundraiser together. The event was packed with local leaders, families, and people Sarah had helped over the years. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, but tensions simmered just below the surface. As Alex mingled with the crowd, he overheard a conversation about his recent business decisions. "He's sold off half his assets. What's next? Another charity case?" One man sneered. Alex ignored the comment, but Sarah didn't. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "Those charity cases are changing lives," she said, her gaze unwavering. "And Alex is doing more good than you'll ever understand." The man's face reddened, but he said nothing further. Alex watched Sarah with a mixture of admiration and pride, realizing just how much strength she carried within her. Later that evening, as they stood on the venue's balcony, he turned to her. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. Sarah's laugh was soft but genuine. "Maybe not. But you're trying, and that's what matters." As time went on, Alex found himself navigating the delicate balance of rebuilding their relationship while respecting Sarah's independence. There were missteps moments when his old habits of control and overreach surfaced, but Sarah's unwavering honesty kept him grounded. She challenged him to be better, not for her sake, but for his own. One night, As they sat together on her porch, Hope sleeping soundly in her crib inside, Sarah spoke candidly. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fallen apart?" she asked. Alex considered the question, his brow furrowing. "I think about it all the time," he admitted, "but I don't think we would have grown into who we are now without it. As much as it hurt, maybe we needed to fall apart to find our way back together." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe you're right. The story ends not with grand declarations or sweeping gestures, but with the quiet beauty of a life rebuilt." As the three of them sat together at the park, laughter and love surrounding them, it was clear that their journey was just beginning, and this time they were ready to face it together. And just like that, Alex and Sarah's lives came full circle, not in the way either of them expected, but in a way that proved the resilience of love, the strength of forgiveness, and the beauty of second chances. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there's always hope for a brighter tomorrow if we're brave enough to embrace it. If this story inspired you or made you reflect on your own journey, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more incredible stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
What happens when a fairy tale marriage turns into a public nightmare? For Elara Thorne, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, shimmering with crystal and old money, was supposed to be a celebration of her husband's success. She stood by his side, a perfect picture of devotion, her couture gown flowing over the gentle curve of her 8-month pregnancy. He was the prince of New York real estate. She was his adoring wife, carrying their heir. But in one glittering champagne-fueled moment, her prince would reveal himself to be a monster, and the facade of their perfect life would not just crack, it would eclode before the city's elite. The air in their Park Avenue penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken resentment. Elara Thorne adjusted the midnight blue silk of her custom Serafina gown, her fingers tracing the delicate embroidery that struggled to distract from the taut, heavy sphere of her belly. At 8.5 months pregnant, she felt less like a goddess of fertility and more like a ship navigating treacherous waters. Every movement was a negotiation, every breath a conscious effort. "Are you almost ready?" Julian's voice, smooth as polished granite, cut through the silence from the master suite's doorway. He stood there already, a vision of tailored perfection in his Tom Ford tuxedo. Julian Thorne didn't just wear clothes. He inhabited them, his confidence a magnetic field that bent the world to his will. "Almost," Elara murmured, turning to face him. She had chosen the dress weeks ago, hoping it would make her feel elegant, ethereal. Now, under his critical gaze, she felt large, cumbersome. His eyes swept over her, a swift, almost imperceptible inventory that managed to miss her hopeful expression entirely. "That color. It makes you look rather pale, don't you think?" The comment landed like a small, sharp stone in her chest. It wasn't overtly cruel, but it was Julian's specialty. The subtle erosion of her confidence chipping away at her piece by piece until she felt like a ruin. "I thought it brought out my eyes," she offered weakly, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, where their son was currently practicing his kicks. He grunted, turning his attention to his platinum cufflinks. "The car is downstairs. Beatrice is already texting, wondering where we are. You know how she gets about punctuality at these things." Beatrice Thorne, Julian's mother, was a woman who believed tardiness was a moral failing on par with grand larceny. The event, the Thorne Foundation's annual Starlight Gala, was the crown jewel of her social calendar and Julian's biggest philanthropic display of the year. It was an evening dedicated to raising money for underprivileged children, a cause that felt deeply ironic, given how little attention Julian paid to his own impending fatherhood. "I just need to put on my shoes," Elara said, moving towards the velvet ottoman. The simple act of bending down was a monumental task. She gritted her teeth, her back screaming in protest, as she fumbled with the delicate straps of her Jimmy Choos. Julian watched her struggle for a moment, his expression unreadable before sighing with theatrical impatience. "For God's sake, Elara, we'll be late." He didn't move to help. He simply stood there, a handsome statue of irritation. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She swallowed them down, a familiar cocktail of humiliation and frustration. This was their life now. The loving glances had been replaced by critical stares, the tender touches by impatient sighs. The man who had once written her poetry and flown her to Paris for a weekend now looked at her as if she were a line item on his balance sheet that was underperforming. She blamed the pregnancy at first, the hormones, the changes to her body, the shift in their social life. But the coldness had started before that, a creeping frost that began when his real estate empire, Thorn Global Properties, had secured the landmark Hudson Yards redevelopment deal. His success had inflated his ego to terrifying proportions, leaving little room for anything or anyone else. Finally securing the shoes, she stood up, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Okay, I'm ready." He gave her another once-over, his lips a thin, displeased line. "Try to stand up straight tonight. The slouching doesn't help." He then turned and walked out, leaving the words hanging in the air like poison. As she followed his imposing figure through their cavernous apartment, her hand once again found her belly. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump against her palm. "It's just you and me, little one." She thought a wave of fierce, protective love washing over her. "It's always been just you and me." The ride down in the private elevator was silent. The air in the chauffeured Maybach was colder still. Julian was on his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, a small, secretive smile playing on his lips as he texted. Elara looked out the window, watching the glittering lights of Manhattan blur past. Each light represented a life, a story, a world of its own. Her own world, once so bright and full of promise, felt like it was shrinking, dimming, collapsing in on itself, until the only thing left was the hollow echo of what used to be. She was Mrs. Julian Thorne, a name that unlocked any door in the city. But tonight it felt less like a title and more like the name of a very beautiful, very expensive, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a symphony of excess. 3-tiered crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of 1,000 guests. The air hummed with the murmur of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a live jazz quartet. This was Julian's kingdom, and as they entered, he transformed. The cold, dismissive husband from the penthouse melted away, replaced by Julian Thorne, the charismatic titan, the beloved philanthropist. He clasped shoulders, kissed cheeks, and laughed a deep, resonant laugh that made women blush and men feel impotent. Elara was the accessory on his arm, the silent, smiling testament to his perfect life. Julian darling. Beatrice Thorne descended upon them, a formidable figure in emerald green taffeta and a fortress of diamonds. Her smile was as bright and hard as her jewelry. "You're late." "Fashionably, mother," Julian said, kissing the air beside her cheek. Beatrice's eyes the same piercing blue as her son's raked over Elara. Elara, dear, that dress is a bold choice. The Navy is so draining when one is already feeling tired. I feel wonderful, Beatrice, thank you, Elara replied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Beatrice's attention had already shifted back to her son. All the important donors are by the silent auction. Councilman Miller is here, and I think I saw Robert Harrison from the board of MoMA. You must go and charm them. She shooed him away as if dismissing a servant. Julian gave Elara's arm a perfunctory squeeze. Mingle, he commanded under his breath. And for heaven's sake, try to look happy. People are watching. He was gone in an instant, absorbed into a throng of influential figures, leaving Elara standing alone at the edge of the glittering crowd. She felt like a boy cut loose from its mooring adrift in an ocean of strangers who looked through her as if she were glass. She found a quiet spot near a marble column, accepting a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. From her vantage point, she could watch the room. She could watch Julian. He was magnificent, she had to admit. He moved with an innate predatory grace, his charisma a tangible force. And then she saw her, Serena Vance. Serena was the lead counsel for a rival development firm, a woman known for being as brilliant as she was ruthless. She was everything Elara was not sharp-edged, impossibly chic, in a silver form-fitting gown, her blonde hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. She and Julian were professional adversaries, yet they were laughing together, their heads bent close. There was an intimacy in their posture, a shared energy that made Elara's stomach clench. It wasn't the first time she had seen them like this. At other events, she'd noticed their prolonged conversations, the way his eyes would follow Serena across a room. She'd told herself it was just business, professional respect. But the secretive smile on Julian's face as he texted in the car flashed in her mind. It was the same smile he was giving Serena Vance right now. If looks could kill, that woman would be a pile of ash, a familiar voice said beside her. Elara started turning to see her best friend, Chloe. Chloe was an art gallery owner with a no-nonsense attitude and an allergy to phoniness, which made her presence at an event like this a true act of solidarity. I don't know what you're talking about. Elara lied, her gaze still fixed on Julian and Serena. Don't you? Chloe followed her line of sight. Ah, the Ice Queen and the Idiot King, a match made in corporate hell. Chloe took a sip of her champagne. Listen, Elara, we need to talk. Not here, Chloe. Yes, here. Chloe insisted, her voice low and urgent. I had a drink with a friend from law school last week. He works at Serena's firm. He said the whispers are getting louder, that Thorne and Vance aren't just professional rivals anymore. Elara's heart began to beat, a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. Whispers. What whispers? That their rivalry is just a cover, that they're working on something together, a backdoor deal, and that their partnership isn't strictly business. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Elara's feet. She gripped the marble column for support. She had suspected. She had felt it in her bones for months. The late nights at the office, the unexplained business trips, the growing emotional chasm between them. But hearing it spoken aloud, given voice by someone else, made it terrifyingly real. He wouldn't, she whispered, trying to convince herself. Not now. Not with the baby coming. Chloe's expression softened with pity. Oh, honey. Men like Julian don't see a baby as a reason to be faithful. They see it as a cage they need to escape from. And Serena Vance is the shiniest escape hatch in Manhattan. Just then a sharp, unfamiliar pain shot through Ilara's lower back. She gasped, her hand flying to the spot. "Are you okay?" Chloe asked, her face etched with concern. "You're as white as a sheet." "I'm fine," Ilara breathed, forcing the pain down. "It's just Braxton Hicks. The doctor said to expect them." But it felt different, sharper, more insistent. The baby shifted violently inside her as if he too could sense the poison in the air. She looked back across the room. Julian had placed a hand on the small of Serena Vance's back, guiding her towards the terrace. It was a gesture of ownership, a gesture that had once belonged to her. The whispers in her own mind were now louder than the buzz of the gala. The puzzle pieces she had refused to look at for so long were snapping into place, forming a picture of betrayal so vast and cruel it stole her breath. And as another more intense cramp seized her, she had a terrible sinking feeling that the evening was about to get much, much worse. The next hour was a blur of polite smiles and empty conversations. Ilara moved through the ballroom on autopilot, the twin pains in her back and her heart radiating through her body. She spoke to acquaintances who asked about the nursery, fended off unsolicited advice from older women, and dodged Beatrice's disapproving glares. All the while she was acutely aware of Julian, who had returned from the terrace without Serena, his mood inexplicably buoyant. The main event of the evening was Julian's speech. He was to accept an award for Philanthropist of the Year, a title his PR team had worked tirelessly to secure. As he ascended the stage, the room fell into a reverent silence. A spotlight found him, turning him into a golden, godlike figure. He began by thanking the foundation, the board, and the generous donors. He spoke of legacy, of building a better future, of the responsibility of the fortunate to help the less fortunate. His voice was a rich, captivating baritone, weaving a spell of sincerity over the audience. Ilara had heard versions of this speech 100 times, and it always managed to sound convincing. Tonight it sounded like a cacophony of lies. "But a man is nothing without his foundation," Julian said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "He is nothing without the bedrock that supports him, that allows him to build his legacy towards the sky." Ilara felt a flicker of hope. Was he talking about her? About their family? Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe Chloe was mistaken. His eyes finally landed on her, and for a moment they held her gaze. But there was no warmth in them, only a cold, calculating glint. A slow, cruel smile spread across his handsome face. "And as many of you know," he continued, his voice dripping with false sentiment, "my own foundation is expanding." A wave of warm, appreciative laughter rippled through the room. People turned to smile at Ilara. She felt her cheeks flush, a mixture of embarrassment and a desperate, foolish hope. "My lovely wife Ilara is here tonight," he said, gesturing towards her. The spotlight swung from him and settled on her, blinding her. She was pinned a butterfly on a board. "She has been my greatest project, taking her from a simple small-town girl and giving her the world." The tone had shifted. The warmth in the room cooled. The laughter died, replaced by an uncomfortable, uncertain silence. Ilara's smile froze on her face. This wasn't a tribute. It was a prelude to an execution. "And now," Julian said, his voice taking on a tone of mock lament, "she is embarking on her own great project, motherhood. She has truly embraced the domestic arts. She has let herself go in the most beautiful way, of course, swelling with purpose, you might say." A few sycophantic guests chuckled nervously, but most of the room was dead silent, watching the public vivisection with a kind of horrified fascination. He was painting her as a simple brood mare, a bumpkin he had elevated, and who was now fulfilling her rustic biological destiny. He was diminishing her, erasing her identity as an accomplished architect, as his partner in front of everyone they knew. He wasn't done. He leaned closer to the microphone, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "Some people build empires of steel and glass," he said, pausing for effect. "Others are content to build nurseries. And I, for one, think that is a beautiful, if somewhat limited, ambition. Let's hear it for Elara, everyone. For her, commitment." The applause was sparse, hesitant, and died out almost as soon as it began. The spotlight released her swinging back to Julian as he basked in the aftermath of his cruelty. But Elara barely noticed. She was no longer in the ballroom. She was in a vacuum. The air sucked from her lungs, the world a distant roaring sound in her ears. Every insecurity he had ever cultivated in her, every casual insult, every dismissive gesture had just been weaponized and fired at her in a public forum. He hadn't just insulted her, he had tried to annihilate her. He had redefined her to this entire room as a simple-minded, unambitious vessel for his heir, a project he had completed and was now setting aside. The hot tears she had been fighting all night finally broke free, tracing silent, searing falls down her cheeks. Her whole body trembled, a seismic shudder of grief and rage. And deep within her another more powerful tremor answered. A violent, clenching agony ripped through her abdomen, stealing her breath and making her see stars. This was not Braxton Hicks. This was the raw, primal cry of a body pushed beyond its limits. Her fairy tale had ended. The monster was real. And her baby, her innocent son, had decided he had had enough of living in this gilded cage. He was coming. Now. The world swam back into focus with agonizing slowness. Julian was off the stage accepting congratulations from people who studiously avoided making eye contact with Elara. The jazz quartet started playing again, a frantic attempt to paper over the gaping hole of awkwardness Julian had torn in the evening's fabric. Elara didn't care. The only thing she could focus on was the fire in her belly. Rage, pure and incandescent, burned away her tears, leaving a terrifying clarity in its wake. She had to get to him. She had to confront him. Pushing her chair back, she stood up on shaky legs. Chloe was instantly at her side. "Elara, let's go. I'll get you out of here." "No," Elara said, her voice a low, dangerous growl she didn't recognize as her own. "Not yet." She began to walk, each step a testament to her willpower. The crowd parted before her as if she were a ghost, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She kept her eyes locked on Julian, who was laughing with a group of investors, holding his Philanthropist of the Year award like a scepter. He saw her approaching, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He excused himself, turning to meet her in a small alcove, hidden behind a towering floral arrangement. The music and chatter of the gala provided a thin veil of privacy. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice stripped of all its public charm. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "You just stood on a stage and described your pregnant wife as a quaint little project you're tired of. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know." He had the audacity to look bored. "Oh, for God's sake, Elara, it was a joke. A little roast. You're being overly sensitive. It must be the hormones." "The hormones?" Her laugh was a brittle, broken sound. "You stood there talking about building a legacy while you're systematically destroying the only family you have. Is that part of the joke too? This, he said, gesturing vaguely between them, is not my legacy. My legacy is the Thorn global skyline. It's the deals, the power, the name. This is just a chapter, a domestic requirement. The cruelty of his words was so profound, so absolute, that it felt like a physical blow. A domestic requirement. Their marriage, their child, their entire life together reduced to a box he had to check. And Serena Vance, the name slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Is she a domestic requirement too, or is she in the next chapter? Julian's face went rigid. The mask of indifference fell away, replaced by pure, cold rage. You will not speak her name, he seethed, taking a step closer. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're hysterical. I'm not hysterical, she said, her voice rising. I am finally awake. And then it happened. Another contraction, fiercer and more powerful than any before, seized her body. It was a wave of pure agony that buckled her knees. She cried out a raw, involuntary sound of shock and pain. She grabbed his tuxedo jacket for support, her knuckles white. What now? He snapped, trying to pry her fingers off his lapel. More dramatics. But then he followed her horrified gaze downwards. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on the front of her midnight blue Serafina gown. A sudden warm gush ran down her legs, soaking her shoes and pooling on the polished marble floor. Her water had broken. The moment was so cinematic, so utterly dramatic, that for a second neither of them moved. It was the ultimate irrefutable biological truth. A visceral, messy reality crashing into Julian's perfectly curated evening. The baby was coming. The domestic requirement was demanding to be met. Elara stared at the puddle at her feet, then up at her husband's face. The anger was gone, replaced by something far worse. Panic and sheer, undisguised disgust. He looked at her at the evidence of her labor as if she were something unclean that had just ruined his party. The spell of his power over her was shattered. The last vestiges of love, of hope, of shared history evaporated in that single contemptuous glance. There was no us anymore. There was only her and the baby she would protect with her life, and him a stranger whose cruelty knew no bounds. The breaking point had been reached, and the waters that now pooled on the floor were washing away her old life forever. Chaos erupted in their small, semi-private corner of the gala. A woman who had been standing nearby gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God! Her water broke." The words cut through the music and chatter like a siren. Heads turned. The murmuring grew louder, more frantic. Julian's perfectly controlled world was imploding in the most public and primal way imaginable. "Do something," Elara gritted out, leaning heavily against the wall as another contraction ripped through her. Julian was frozen, his face a mask of horror. His meticulously planned evening, his moment of triumph, was being literally washed away. He looked trapped, a cornered animal, desperate for an escape route. Chloe pushed through the gathering circle of onlookers, her face a mixture of fury and concern. "Someone call 911, she shouted, taking Elara's arm. "Elara, breathe. Just breathe." "Get her out of here," Julian hissed at Chloe, his voice low and venomous. "Take her through the service entrance. I don't want a scene." "A scene?" Chloe rounded on him, her eyes blazing. "You're worried about a scene. Your wife is in labor. Where the hell is your humanity?" People were closing in their phones, discreetly raised. This was a scandal far more interesting than any silent auction. Julian Thorn, the great philanthropist, the family man, looking at his wife in her moment of ultimate vulnerability, with nothing but cold fury. Panic finally spurred Julian into action, but it was a selfish, desperate panic, focused solely on damage control. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. I need to manage this. He wasn't calling an ambulance. He wasn't calling his mother. He was scrolling through his contacts, his mind clearly on his business, on the fallout. The pain was immense, but through it, Elara found a pocket of chilling calm. It was the calm of a soldier on a battlefield who knows there's no going back. She watched her husband, the father of the child, fighting its way into the world, and saw with absolute certainty what his priorities were. Don't bother calling your office, Julian, she said. Her voice, though strained, cut through the noise. It was clear and sharp as a shard of ice. Julian froze his thumb, hovering over the screen of his phone. The immediate crowd fell silent, sensing a new act was about to begin in this terrible play. He looked at her, his eyes wide with a warning. Don't you dare. She dared. Fueled by the agony of childbirth and the inferno of his betrayal, she looked him dead in the eye. There's no point in trying to salvage your precious Hudson Yards deal tonight, she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The Hudson Yards deal was the biggest, most contested real estate venture in the city, and Thorn Global Properties was in a bitter final stage battle for it. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath as the contraction began to subside. She then turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the horrified, fascinated faces in the crowd until it landed on one in particular. Serena Vance. Serena had been drawn in by the commotion and was standing near the edge of the circle, her face a perfect porcelain mask of neutrality. But Elara could see the flicker of panic in her cold grey eyes. After all, Elara continued, her voice ringing out in the sudden silence, why don't you just ask your partner for help? She held Serena's gaze. Serena Vance seems to be the one you're building this new future for anyway. I'm sure she can handle the crisis. The name landed like a bomb. The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where 100 different realizations dawned at once. The whispers Chloe had heard, the late-night meetings, the hand on the back. It wasn't just an affair. It was a professional conspiracy. Julian Thorn and his biggest rival, Serena Vance, were in bed together, literally and figuratively. He wasn't competing with her for the Hudson Yards deal. He was colluding with her. The public rivalry was a sham, a brilliant, audacious lie to manipulate the market and sideline other competitors. Serena Vance's composure finally shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking stark and skeletal under the ballroom lights. Julian looked between his wife and his mistress, his face a grotesque tableau of rage and utter devastation. He had been exposed, his personal and professional lives detonated simultaneously by the woman he had just tried to erase. Another contraction hit Elara harder this time. She cried out, sinking towards the floor. But Chloe, and surprisingly, an older gentleman she vaguely recognized as Robert Harrison from the MoMA board, caught her. "Get this man away from her," Mr. Harrison commanded, glaring at Julian with utter contempt. The unveiling was complete. In the opulent ballroom, surrounded by the city's elite, the truth had been laid bare, not by a whisper, but by the raw, undeniable power of a woman scorned and a baby determined to be born into a world free of its father's lies. The wail of the ambulance siren was a welcome scream, drowning out the frantic, venomous whispers that had consumed the ballroom. The paramedics were efficient and professional, their presence a grounding force in the swirling vortex of drama. They loaded Alara onto a gurney, her blue dress stained and her face pale but resolute. Julian tried to get into the ambulance with her. "I'm her husband," he stated, as if the title still held any meaning. One of the paramedics, a stern-faced woman named Maria, blocked his path. Chloe stood right behind her. "Sir, she's under extreme stress. The doctor inside said only one person can ride with her to minimize agitation. She's asked for her friend." Maria's eyes were like steel. She had clearly assessed the situation in seconds. The look of impotent fury on Julian's face was something Alara would treasure. Defeated, he stepped back as the door slammed shut, leaving him on the curb bathed in the flashing red and white lights, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. Inside the ambulance, the ride to Lenox Hill Hospital was a surreal journey through pain and clarity. Between contractions that felt like her body was being torn in two, Chloe held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement. Her presence, a lifeline. Alara focused on her breathing, on the life force inside her, on the future. A future without Julian. 7 hours later, just as the dirty grey light of dawn began to break over the Manhattan skyline, Leo Alexander Thorne was born. He was small, angry, and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's determined eyes. Holding him for the first time, Alara felt a love so overwhelming and pure that it eclipsed all the pain and betrayal. This was her legacy. This tiny, screaming, beautiful boy. Not a building of steel and glass, but a life of flesh and blood. Julian arrived at the hospital hours later. He didn't come to the maternity ward first. He came with his lawyer, a shark named Marcus Finch. They found Alara in her private room, Leo asleep in a bassinet beside her bed. Chloe stood guard, like a sentinel. "Alara," Julian began, his voice devoid of all emotion. "We need to discuss how we're going to handle this." "There is no we, Julian," she said, her voice tired but firm. "And there is nothing to handle other than our divorce." Marcus Finch stepped forward, holding a folder. "Mrs. Thorne, Julian, is prepared to be very generous, provided you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding his business dealings and personal associations. We can release a joint statement about an amicable separation." Alara started to laugh. It was a raw, weary sound, but it was genuine. An NDA. Amicable. "Julian, did you not see what happened last night? The entire social and financial stratosphere of New York City watched you get exposed. Your personal association with Serena Vance is probably on the cover of the Post by now. The ship of Amicable has sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean." Julian's face tightened. "Don't be a fool, Alara. Think of your son. You want him to have a comfortable life, don't you? You don't want a protracted, ugly legal battle." It was a threat, plain and simple. "Fight me, and I will ruin you." "What I want," she said, her eyes boring into his, "is for my son to have a mother he can be proud of. One who doesn't roll over and let a bully buy her silence. So you can take your generous offer and your NDA, and you can leave." She looked at her sleeping son. "His name, by the way, is Leo Alexander Reyes. Reyes was my mother's name. He will not carry the name of a man like you." The finality in her voice was absolute. Julian and his lawyer stood there for a moment, stunned into silence by her audacity. She was no longer the quiet, agreeable wife. The woman in this hospital bed was a stranger to them, forged in the fires of public humiliation and childbirth. "You will regret this," Julian snarled as they left. "I will fight you for everything. You will walk away with nothing." The door clicked shut, leaving Alara and Chloe in silence. "Are you sure about this?" Chloe asked softly. "He will make your life hell." Alara looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Leo's hand. Her foundation. "He already did," she said. "Now I'm building something new." The aftershocks came quickly. The next day, the Thorn Global Board announced an internal investigation into the Hudson Yards bid. Serena Vance was fired from her firm. The gossip columns were having a field day, painting a lurid picture of corporate espionage and sordid affairs. Julian's philanthropic award was quietly rescinded. A week after Leo was born, a process server delivered the first legal documents to Alara's hospital room. It was a petition for sole custody, citing her emotional instability and public outburst as evidence of her being an unfit mother. The battle had just begun. But for the first time in a very long time, Alara Thorn Reyes felt ready for a fight. 1 year later, Alara stood on a dusty construction site in Brooklyn, a hard hat perched on her head and a roll of blueprints tucked under her arm. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of sawdust and the distant hum of the city. Before her, the steel skeleton of a building rose against the sky, the future site of the Reyes Community Center, a pro bono project she had designed and was now overseeing. Life after Julian was not easy, but it was real. His threats had not been idle. He had unleashed the full force of his legal team, attempting to bury her in motions and depositions. He had frozen their joint assets, forcing her to rely on Chloe, and alone from her estranged but now reconciled family. He painted her in the press as a vengeful, unstable gold digger. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed the woman he was fighting was the same one he had married. He didn't account for the fact that by trying to destroy her, he had stripped away all her fear, leaving only resolve. With the help of a brilliant, tenacious female lawyer, Chloe had recommended Alara fought back. They used the testimony of dozens of gala attendees. They subpoenaed phone records between Julian and Serena. They brought in forensic accountants who uncovered the shell corporations Julian and Serena had created to funnel money and information for their collusive Hudson Yards bid. The custody battle was brutal, but Julian's own arrogance became his undoing. On the stand, his contempt for Alara, his dismissive attitude towards fatherhood, and his blatant narcissism were on full display for the judge. The court awarded Alara sole physical custody of Leo, with Julian granted only supervised visitation, which he rarely used. The divorce settlement, thanks to the evidence of his corporate malfeasance and infidelity, was far from the nothing he had promised her. It was substantial enough for her to start over not in opulence, but in comfort and independence. The Thorn-Vance empire had crumbled as spectacularly as it had been unveiled. Their backdoor deal for Hudson Yards collapsed under the weight of the scandal, and both of them became subjects of a federal investigation into market manipulation. Their affair, deprived of its glamorous high-stakes backdrop, had soured into bitter recriminations. Last Alara heard, they were suing each other. Julian's mother, Beatrice, had retreated from the social scene, her legacy tainted by her son's public disgrace. Alara sold the Park Avenue penthouse, a place that held only ghosts for her now. She bought a charming brownstone in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, trading sterile panoramic views for a small backyard with a swing set. Her life was smaller, but infinitely more full. It was filled with the sound of Leo's laughter, the smell of his baby shampoo, and the quiet satisfaction of her own work. She had reopened her own small architectural firm, Reyes Design, focusing on sustainable community-oriented projects, the kind of work that nourished her soul, not just her bank account. As she stood on the construction site, her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Leo's nanny. He was at the park, sitting in a pile of autumn leaves, a huge, gummy smile on his face. Her heart swelled. That was her empire. That was her skyline. A man walked up beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. It was Liam, an old friend from her university days, who had been at the gala that night. He was one of the few who had reached out in the aftermath, offering not pity but genuine friendship. He was a landscape architect, and they were collaborating on the community center's garden. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her a cup. His smile was warm and uncomplicated. "It's looking good, Alara. Really good." "Thanks, Liam," she said, taking a sip. "It's a start." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the welders send sparks into the air as they fortified the building's foundation. Alara thought back to that night at the gala, a lifetime ago. Julian had called her his foundation, the bedrock that supported him. He had been wrong. She had never been his foundation. She had been trapped in his basement. Now she was finally building something on her own ground, something strong, something true, something that was meant to last. And it was beautiful. 3 years passed, in the fast-paced world of New York City. 3 years could be a lifetime. Kuntuku, for Alara it was. Her firm Reyes design had flourished. She'd earned a reputation for creating spaces that were not just beautiful, but soulful and humane. The Reyes Community Center in Brooklyn was a celebrated success, a vibrant hub of life that had become a model for urban renewal projects. She had won awards, been featured in architectural magazines, and most importantly had built a life of peaceful, joyful stability. Leo was now 4 years old, a whirlwind of energy and laughter, with his mother's bright, curious eyes and a stubborn chin that was all his own. He was the sun around which Ilara's universe gracefully orbited. Her relationship with Liam had blossomed into a deep and loving partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect and easy camaraderie. He was a gentle, steady presence in both her life and Leo's, a man who knew how to build a garden and nurture a family with the same patient hands. The spectre of Julian Thorne had faded. After the public implosion of his Hudson Yards scheme and the ensuing federal investigation, he had paid a massive fine and retreated from the public eye. The Thorne global empire was a shadow of its former self, and Julian, once the king of the city, had become a ghost. Alara had almost allowed herself to believe he was gone for good. But ghosts have a way of reappearing when you least expect them. It was a crisp Saturday in October. Alara, Liam, and Leo were at the playground in Central Park, the one near the carousel. Leo was shrieking with delight as Liam pushed him on the swings higher and higher. Alara sat on a nearby bench, sipping a warm coffee, a contented smile on her face. This simple, perfect moment was everything she had ever fought for. A beautiful family. The voice was unmistakable, smooth, confident, and laced with a familiar poison. Alara's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Julian Thorne stood there. He looked different. Thinner, perhaps, with a few more lines etched around his eyes, but still impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than her car. He wasn't looking at her, but at Leo and Liam, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "What are you doing here, Julian?" Alara's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "It's a public park, isn't it?" He finally turned his gaze to her. He attempted a smile, a practiced, charming gesture that no longer reached his eyes. I wanted to see my son. On the swings, Liam had noticed him. He slowed Leo's arc, his body tensing, his expression becoming guarded. Your supervised visitation is on the first Sunday of the month at the designated center. You know that. You haven't shown up in 6 months. Elara stated, her tone flat and factual. Those places are so sterile, impersonal, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. I've been doing a lot of work on myself, Elara. Therapy, soul-searching. I realize now how much I lost, how much I pushed away. I just want a chance to be a part of his life. A real part. The words were all correct. They were the words of a changed man. But Elara had spent years studying the nuances of Julian's manipulations. She could see the performance. He was an actor playing a role, and he was watching her intently, gauging her reaction. Liam brought a now quiet Leo over to the bench. Leo, who had only ever seen his biological father in pictures and during a few awkward early visitations, hid behind Liam's legs, peering out with suspicion. Leo, this is Julian, Elara said softly, her protective instincts screaming. You must be Liam, Julian said, extending a hand. His smile was wide, but his eyes were chips of ice. Thank you for stepping in. The words were meant to sound gracious, but they were a clear assertion of territory, a reminder that Liam was merely a replacement. Liam shook his hand briefly, his grip firm. I'm not stepping in. I'm part of this family. An awkward silence descended. Julian crouched down to Leo's level. Hello, Leo. I'm your father. Leo just stared, his thumb finding its way into his mouth. I have something for you, Julian said, pulling a small, elegantly wrapped box from his coat pocket. It was a miniature functioning replica of a vintage Aston Martin, a toy so extravagant and out of place for a playground that it was almost comical. Leo looked at the toy, then at his mother. Elara gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. This was a transaction, not a gift. He doesn't need toys, Julian. He needs a father who shows up, she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. Julian's mask of contrition slipped for a second. A flicker of his old, cold anger flashed in his eyes before he masked it again. He stood up, sighing dramatically. I know I have a lot to make up for. That's why I'm here. I'd like to start spending more time with him. Real time. Here at the park. Maybe take him to a museum. We can discuss it through our lawyers, Elara said, standing up. Come on, Leo. It's time to go. Elara, please, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Don't do this. Don't punish me through him. I'm trying to make amends. For all of us. His sudden plea for sympathy was so audacious, so manipulative, that it almost took her breath away. But as he spoke, she noticed something. A man, sitting on a bench across the green, seemingly reading a newspaper. But the paper was angled just so, and the long lens of the camera tucked beside him was aimed directly at them. The truth hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't about Leo. This wasn't about amends or soul-searching. This was a photo-op. Julian was staging his redemption. The fallen mogul's heart-breaking reunion with his estranged son. It was a calculated PR move to rebuild his shattered image, and he was using their child as a prop. The last shred of her doubt vanished, replaced by a cold-hard fury. The echo of the man who had humiliated her at the gala was standing right here performing the same kind of public manipulation. Only this time the stage was a children's playground. She scooped Leo into her arms, holding him tight. "Get away from us, Julian," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "And tell your photographer he can go home." She turned and walked away, Liam at her side, leaving Julian standing alone by the swings with his expensive unwanted toy. He didn't call after her. The performance was over. His audience was leaving, and the mask had fallen completely. She could feel his silent, venomous rage following her all the way out of the park. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was not the end. It was a declaration of a new kind of war. The staged photos appeared online the next day on a notorious gossip blog. Julian Thorne, a changed man, trying to reconnect with his son, only to be coldly rebuffed by his bitter ex-wife and her new lover. The narrative was expertly crafted, painting him as a victim and her as the villain. It was a classic Julian move. If you can't win the truth, rewrite the story. For a few days, the story gained traction, and Alara felt the familiar sting of public judgment. But this time, she was not alone, and she was not silent. Her lawyer issued a concise, brutal statement detailing Julian's 6-month absence from scheduled visitations and the convenient presence of a paparazzi photographer at his spontaneous park visit. Public opinion, already wary of Julian, swung swiftly and decisively back against him. The attempt to use his son for PR backfired, making him look even more monstrous and calculating than before. It was the last straw. Enraged and publicly humiliated once again, Julian came for her. Not with lawyers or photographers, but with the raw, desperate fury of a king who had lost his kingdom and his power. He showed up at the grand reopening of the Reyes Community Center. It was the center's 3rd anniversary, and the event was a celebration of everything Alara had built. The main hall, a soaring space of reclaimed wood, exposed brick and vast windows she had designed, was filled with neighborhood families, local leaders, and the joyful noise of children. Alara was on a small stage, thanking the community with Liam and a happy tuxedo-clad Leo beside her. And then she saw him. Julian was standing at the back of the room, a thunderous expression on his face. He began to walk forward, his presence sucking the warmth and joy out of the air. The crowd parted, a wave of unease rippling through the room. He stopped at the foot of the small stage, looking up at her. "This is quite the little empire you've built," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "All on my money, of course. You should be thanking me." Alara's heart pounded, but her voice was calm as she spoke into the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she said to the stunned crowd. "It seems we have one final unscheduled donor to acknowledge." She handed Leo to Liam, who gently led him to the side, shielding him. She stepped down from the stage to face Julian on the floor on his level. She was no longer looking down on him, nor was she cowering beneath him. They were for the first time equals. "You have nothing, Julian," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Your money didn't build this. This was built with talent and hard work. It was built with integrity. Concepts you wouldn't understand." "Integrity?" He scoffed, his voice rising. "Don't you dare preach to me about integrity. I picked you up from nothing. You were a small-town girl with a portfolio of quaint little drawings. I gave you a name. I gave you a life. I gave you a son, and you threw it all away. You didn't give me anything, Julian. You tried to cage me," she corrected him, her gaze unwavering. "You thought I was a project you could build and then abandon like one of your glass towers. But you made a mistake. You thought my foundation was you. You were wrong." She gestured around the room, at the children, laughing at the families, talking at the vibrant art on the walls. "This is my foundation. Truth. community, love, things you can't buy or bully or manipulate. You stand here in a house that truth built, and you are a ghost. Your empire was a house of cards Julian built on lies and secrets. It was destined to fall. He stared at her, his face contorted with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate. He had come here for a final public showdown, expecting to shatter her with his presence, to remind her of his power. But his words had no effect. His anger was a storm breaking against a sea wall. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She pitied him. In her calm, pitying eyes, Julian Thorne finally saw his own defeat. It wasn't a legal loss or a financial one. It was a total spiritual annihilation. He had no power here. He had no power over her. He was irrelevant. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the building. No one watched him go. The life of the party, the community immediately swelled to fill the space he had vacated, the joyful noise returning as if he had never been there at all. Elara watched the door swing shut behind him, and for the first time she felt the last heavy chain of her past fall away. Liam came to her side, his hand finding hers. Leo ran to her, wrapping his small arms around her legs. She looked around the beautiful bustling room she had designed, at the smiling face of the man she loved, and at the bright, hopeful eyes of her son. She had once been the silent, pregnant wife, publicly shamed at a gala. Now she was the celebrated architect of her own life, standing strong in the house she had built, not from the ashes of her old life, but on a brand new, unshakable foundation of her own making. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was, and always had been, about her. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest breakdowns lead to our most profound breakthroughs. The night that should have been her ultimate humiliation became the moment of her liberation. She walked through the fire of public betrayal and emerged not as a victim, but as the architect of her own new life. Her journey from the gilded cage of Park Avenue to a place of true self-worth and happiness is a testament to the incredible strength that lies within us, often waiting for a crisis to be unleashed. If Elara's journey from heartbreak to empowerment moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever witnessed a moment where the truth exploded in the most public way possible? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for listening.